When you are now recording.
All right. Hi, this is Kelly Knight with the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault, LaFASA, and I have Mr. Frank Lamothe here today with me. He is with the Lamothe Law Firm in the New Orleans area, but we thought it would be a good idea to come to Southeastern and give a little bit of information about what it looks like if you have been victimized or sexually assaulted on the other side, the legal side. And he is an amazing expert in this field. And you could tell us more about your credentials than I can.
Oh, Kelly, thank you so much for inviting me to talk. I'm the founder of Lamothe Law Firm. We do a substantial amount of work with survivors of sexual abuse or sexual assault. We've devoted a considerable amount of our efforts to helping these people and look at it as a secular ministry, where if we can make people's lives better who have been traumatized this way, we're going to do it. So we've handled hundreds of these matters. And in fact, each week we probably get 3 or 4 calls related to this very subject matter, which is not good because it means things are happening to people we wish were not happening. But if we can help somebody who's unfortunately had this kind of problem, we certainly want to be able to do it.
Right, that's great because when people do feel encouraged enough to come forward, then you can help them. And so that's wonderful.
It's unfortunate that so many survivors do not come forward.
Right.
It's extremely difficult for people to take the step of coming forward. We're aware of so many circumstances where someone is abused as a child. They don't tell their parents. They don't tell anybody else they're close to. And then finally, as an adult, they might take the step to come forward. Average age coming forward is 52.
Wow.
Which means a huge passage of time has occurred.
Right.
And this has been eating away inside of this person the whole time, and finally when they can't stand it any longer, they'll take the step of reaching out and talking to someone.
Right. And that's pretty much what we see at LaFASA statewide. It's not just something that you might see. And I know that when something does happen, a lot of times the victim is a little bit confused, doesn't know what to do. So maybe you can kind of explain the difference between a criminal situation and a civil situation, and just kind of let them if this has happened to somebody, let them know what might happen.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 tracks that are in existence. There's the criminal, because when an act like this is committed, it's a criminal offense.
Right.
Whether it's a sexual abuse of a child or a rape, or the many different aspects of abuse that can occur, well, that's a criminal offense. It can be criminally charged, prosecuted. Also, it's a wrong against that person.
Right.
And that wrong can be pursued in a criminal sense as well as a civil sense. So you can have a dual track, and we do the civil side. We're not prosecutors.
Right.
And so if someone comes to us with a problem, we determine whether or not we can help them inside of the civil justice system. And that determination depends on a variety of factors. Sometimes we can't help somebody because if they just were abused by someone who has no assets to pursue,
right.
There's not a lot we can do for that person. But quite often, there's someone that we can look to, like an employer, or in the case of clergy, obviously, the organization that employs that person. So, or sometimes, let's say something happened in an apartment building where there's not adequate security and something bad occurs because of lack of security.
Right.
Or many other sports organizations, scouting organizations. There's many ways this kind of events can occur.
Right.
And we look to see if there's something we can do for someone, based on the facts that we have to deal with.
Sure. Well, so let's talk about the criminal side. So if a survivor makes a police report, what can they do to maximize the chances that the perpetrator is going to be convicted?
You can help the prosecutor because prosecutors are very busy. They cannot know always what evidence you might have in your possession or someone might have that can assist them. We have a matter right now that's pending where we were able to provide substantial amount of evidence to a prosecutor, including a note from the perpetrator because he was grooming a young woman, and he tried to be careful and cover his tracks, but he slipped, and we have the note. We have all the gifts he gave her, and so these are things that can be used to support the prosecution.
Right. Don't discount anything.
Do not discount anything because you might not realize these items can be valuable and used to bring a matter in the criminal side.
Right, right.
And we also try to build relationships with prosecutors. We can't interfere with their work because we don't want to taint a prosecution, but if we can provide information that we become aware of, we certainly do it so they can have what we have.
Right, right, and that's going to benefit everybody all
Sure.
around. And so if the survivor finds out that the perpetrator has abused them and also abused someone else, does that help their situation?
Well, yeah, because if one person says it, you can always attack their credibility. And if 5 people show up and say it, then it starts to say there's something really here.
Right.
Prosecutors need to prove cases beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a high burden of proof.
Right.
And so any corroborative evidence they can get is helpful to them. Look at Bill Crosby. It took a whole bunch of people to eventually bring him to justice, who came forward and said, this happened to me. Epstein, Weinstein, Larry Nassar, who apparently abused over 200 girls on who were gymnastic squad.
Right. That was a crazy situation because people didn't believe those girls, but it took multiple voices to come together.
Multiple voices can be very powerful. So if you're aware that somebody else has been abused, you can become a voice.
Right. And if you bring your voice up, then somebody else might hear that and they might say, hey, that person abused me too. And so there's your second voice, even though you didn't intend on that happening.
And it can sometimes lead to a third voice.
Right. Right.
And that's very important, and that helps a prosecutor build his case. Because, so many times these things are not witnessed, there's no videotape, there's nothing that is, proof beyond what someone says.
Right.
And so you're trying to find proof that, can be used in court that'll help bring a successful prosecution.
Right, right. And that's victims helping other victims.
Yes, absolutely. You're helping other victims.
Right.
And that's what it takes to, sometimes, bring these matters to justice. Unfortunately, it can take too long sometimes because we look at, a lot of these, circumstances that we all see on the news now. Look how long it took.
Oh, absolutely.
But, finally the day comes and you have a successful prosecution.
Right, right. And so it is tough once you decide that you do want to report or you do want what are the benefits of deciding the closure that comes with it?
Well, I think a lot of people can get some closure, and it's just hanging out there for a lot of people, and it's hanging inside of them as well. It's just eating them inside.
Right, right.
And to get some acknowledgement of a wrong, to get some sense that there's been some justice, and that they're not just somebody saying something and nobody's listening to them, it gives them a much stronger sense of self-worth. And I think it's valuable to take some steps, if they can, or are strong enough to do it, and get some closure.
Right, and we always encourage a victim or survivor to do what is right for them. Sometimes not reporting or bringing a case is the best decision, but sometimes, like Frank is saying, it's it's part of the healing path that can bring you some closure that nothing else can, and might make you feel like you've regained your power and you're in control of your own destiny at that point.
Yeah, it has to be an individual decision on the part of the survivor, because some people, are just not able to
Right.
step forward and deal with that type of scrutiny.
Right, right. And so the benefits of a civil lawsuit, you mentioned that you have to have beyond reasonable doubt
That's for a criminal case.
criminal conviction.
Right.
But with a civil,
With a civil suit, the burden of proof is called probability, more probable than not. So
Right.
it's a reduced burden of proof. So it's, call it the 51% rule.
Right.
It just tips ever so slightly in favor of, the person bringing the claim. That's deemed to be adequate proof. So, what evidence a prosecutor would look at to meet his burden, he's going to want more things than the civil lawyer might need to say, I think I can prove this case, and be successful with it.
right, right. And that kind of makes you feel a little bit better that you might not, everything might not be all for naught. Because in a criminal case, you might go through the whole thing, and I think that there's a stat that says maybe 1%, unfortunately, of criminals are actually convicted of a crime that has to deal with sexual assault, which is, very sad. But I'm sure that the percentage is higher in civil cases.
Well, over 90% of civil cases actually settle. They don't go to trial.
Wow.
And so, that means there was some resolution
Yes.
that was positive for the claimant. And so if you look at that statistic and say if you can be in that 90%,
Yes.
then you've gotten some positive resolution. If the case has some proof, weaknesses, in other words, there's some proof issues, that just can affect where the matter resolves as opposed to it not resolving at all.
Right, right. And that percentage is high, so that's good. So how long do survivors have, to bring up to have a civil lawsuit?
Well, it's going to depend on the circumstances of what happened. In 1993, the Louisiana legislature passed a statute that gives a child survivor, 10 years from the age of majority to bring a claim. So if you're a major at age 18, that pushes you up to 28.
Okay.
There's some other statutes offering 3 years for adult survivors to bring a sexual assault claim. There are some authorities that, look at our case authorities in Louisiana, that are a little bit ambiguous, and with adults, we generally encourage them to act within a year, just to be safe.
Right.
Because that's your general tort prescriptions, 1 year, and rather than take a chance, then we say a year to make sure you're within that any time period that could affect you. Now, there is a possibility with adults who were abused as children and who come forward late, back to the age 52 issue, where they
Right,
show
right.
up at age 52, or I've had people walk into my office at age 65 and tell me something happened when they were 7 years old, and it's been
Oh my gosh.
tearing them apart all these years. If their memory was blocked out because of trauma, then they can still bring a claim, because the fact that it was repressed interrupts the running of the time. And
Wow,
with
that's
trauma victims,
interesting.
many times the memory will be repressed because what we do as a defense mechanism is
Absolutely.
totally block out something bad that happened.
There's a whole lot of neurology of the brain that comes into play right
In fact,
there.
there's an expert in Harvard, Dr. Dan Brown, who's written a book on this, which is very, very good on repressed memory, and he's been an expert in a number of these cases. The Louisiana Supreme Court recognizes repressed memory as a condition that can affect the running of time in these cases. So to be able to show that, you have to have a qualified psychologist examine that person and determine that they
Right.
do in fact have repressed memory.
Right. So you do have to be a little bit vulnerable to somebody examining you for that to happen.
Right, exactly, and you have to be willing to submit to a long examination
Right.
with some testing associated with it to be able to document that you did have repressed memory, and then you're looking for some triggering event that restored the memory. They might see some program on television that dealt with abuse. They might read something in the newspaper about abuse, and it starts triggering the return of memories. And we
Right.
commonly see this. And then things start cascading in their minds.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, there it is again.
Right.
And it's usually very traumatic when things start pouring out again.
Right.
All of a sudden, you have this to deal with in your consciousness.
Right.
It's
'Cause
not
you've
buried
suppressed
anymore.
it all this
But
time.
then the
Yeah.
survivor will say, now I'm starting to understand why I've been having all these problems my whole life.
Right.
Because they didn't know.
That's true. We've seen that in many cases, at Lamothe, where survivors have issues. They don't understand why, they've taken certain paths, and it's because they've had trauma that has affected them earlier in their life, and they've suppressed it.
I've had people that have gotten psychiatric care, but if they didn't know they were abused, they couldn't tell that to their provider.
Right.
And say, this is what happened to me when I was a child, so they're getting treated for all these symptoms,
Right.
Depression, anger,
Right.
loss of self-worth. All these things are part of what they show up with for treatment, but don't know the root cause. So you can't effectively treat them if you don't know what the root cause is.
Right. Yeah.
I've had to tell people, you need to go back to your doctor now that you are aware of this and tell them you've been abused,
Right.
so they can know what to do to treat you.
Exactly, because that just changes the whole course of, whatever it is that has caused all those issues. They don't think it, because a lot of times, it might be an actual medical condition, but at that point they know it's a psychological.
Know what
or
it really
psychological.
is.
Right. Right. Are there any legal protections for sexual violence survivors in the courtroom?
Yeah, there are some, and there are a couple of statutes, both federal and state systems, where sexual history or sexual predispositions are not admitted into evidence. And so you don't have to worry about your whole past being laid out for everyone if you would go to court and want to pursue a matter. And that would apply both in the criminal and in the civil
Right,
courthouses. These are rules of evidence that bar certain evidence, and these are to protect people who are survivors.
Right, and that's good to know, because that's another reason why somebody might not want to bring something up, because if something you've done in the past that can be used against you, that has nothing, may or may not have to do with the case, you don't want that being brought up.
Right, because your past might involve some voluntary behaviors, but when you are assaulted or attacked, that's not voluntary. That means someone has done something to you that you didn't want to have happen.
Right.
And so
right.
all the voluntary behaviors that you might have engaged in your past really don't have anything to do with what happened to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, what are some potential institutions or defendants that can be sued?
Well, the problem with some of these claims is, let's say you are attacked or you are assaulted. Well, from a civil point of view, what we can do for people is collect money for them.
Right.
And I try to look at it more holistically, and I hope in any way I can to make someone's life better, but at the end of the day, through the civil justice system, you collect money. Well, you need a source.
Right, right.
And a lot of people who are, say, assaulted, they're, the person that did it to them has no money.
Right,
And they can't really stand for a judgment, or they can't participate in a settlement. So we're looking to institutions they might have had some relationship with. And so, in the case of schools, the school might have employed the teacher who abuses the child, but they didn't do due diligence in employing that teacher.
Right.
And we had a case like that where a teacher abused 11 children.
Wow.
And he was a student teacher, but he had problems, but he wasn't properly vetted.
Oh my gosh.
And so that'd be an example of that.
Yes.
We have a healthcare provider who abused a person who was being treated at a psychiatric hospital as an outpatient because she'd been raped, and then she's taken advantage of by one of her caretakers. So
Right,
you can
so
go to
that-
the institution.
Sure.
You could have an apartment building that didn't have adequate security, and so a perpetrator was able to gain access to the hallway, get inside, and do something that was inappropriate.
Absolutely.
And we all know things we see on the news, Boy Scouts, gymnastic teams,
Right.
where you can go to some organization and say the organization has to be responsible for, what its employee or what its agent did to cause some harm.
Sure, sure. And I'm sure that, whatever the monetary reward is, that's good because that person can now seek treatment.
Well, a lot of people desperately need therapy,
Right,
and unfortunately, a lot of insurance plans don't provide full coverage for therapy.
right,
And so they could have a fund, hopefully they can use to get, the help they need to, make their lives better. And we
Right,
look
right.
at that as a very important thing in getting people some, financial compensation, as you now have money to
Sure.
get help and get care,
sure.
which is important. Also, some people have had, they've been so terribly traumatized, their work history is not that good because
Right.
they've had trouble maintaining employment. And so a rainy day fund never hurts.
Right, right.
And they can have some money to take care of needs if they're not able to take care of their needs through employment.
Right. Well, we always encourage a survivor to do what is the best decision for them, whether it's to disclose the sexual assault or whether it's to, bring a case against them, whatever that is. Their closure is individual, but we offer help throughout the state. We offer help here in the Tangipahoa area. So anybody that wants to seek assistance, through counseling can get that free of charge. You don't have to worry about that, and you don't have to disclose anything. And you can find that information at lafasa.org, LAFASA.org. But if you would like to have some questions answered, or if you're watching this and you think I might know somebody that might be able to be helped by bringing about a legal case, then they can call you, I'm sure, right? And
They
ask
may,
some
yes.
questions.
They can.
And you'll clarify the situation.
We can talk to them and decide what option would be best for them.
Right.
And, it's confidential. No one, is aware of, our communication. And then after they have some initial meeting, they can decide what they think their options are.
Right.
That would work for them. And not everybody should pursue a lawsuit because, if they're not in an emotional state to do it, but then we can just provide some advice and let them, think about it. And, if they decide later they want to do something, they're always welcome to come back.
Right. Well, this has been fantastic. I know that you've probably clarified a lot of questions that people have in their minds because there's so many different routes that you can go, different routes to take, and you just don't know what to do. But when you have a little bit of information under your belt, then it helps you to move ahead and move along. So I thank you so much for coming in and answering these questions for us.
Well, Kelly, thank you for having me. I know LaFasa does just an incredible job of helping survivors, and we're also happy to help in any way we can.
All right, thank you.